right, everyone. Welcome back to How I Sell, presented by the Ramp Podcast. Today, I have a special guest with us. She comes to us by way of Faire, where she is the head of sales and account management. She's had a great career with many stops along the way at super impressive companies like Masterclass, ClassPass. She is a graduate from Stanford GSB. Jen Burke, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Danny. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. We're excited to have you on. I got a little tripped up, Masterclass and ClassPass. So those were
It's confusing. Two classes back to back as well in
yeah,
my resume.
two classes back to back. I love it. Well, before we jump into the same 5 questions we ask all our guests on season 2 of How I Sell to get that apples to apples comparison, who is Jen Burke?
Yeah, I guess I'll talk about myself both professionally and personally. So professionally, I consider myself a go-to-market leader, specifically focused on sales and success roles. I've been working on that for the last 8 to 10 years, but my path there wasn't quite straightforward. I spent the first 8 years of my career actually pretty directionless, doing things in marketing, advertising, consulting. As you mentioned, I went to business school and nothing really clicked for me. And then I kind of fell into sales by chance or by accident. I took a job at the first class company, so ClassPass, which for those of you who are unfamiliar, it's a fitness subscription service that enables consumers to hop around to different fitness studios all over their local city or neighborhood, kind of under one membership. And I was hired as a general manager, but they really just needed people to sign up studios and do sales. And so that's how it started for me. I had no formal sales training at the time. I had no idea what I was doing the first few weeks and honestly was like pretty terrified. But I got some support from some really smart people around me in sales. And pretty quickly, I learned to love it and realized I was pretty good at it too. And I've stayed on that track like ever since. So today, as you mentioned, I currently lead sales and success at a company called Faire. And then personally, I live in San Francisco with my husband and 3 kids. All 3 kids are under the age of 5. So it's absolute chaos each and every day, but I love it and I wouldn't want it any other way.
Well, that's a great background. I appreciate you going in depth on both the personal side and the professional side. Helps the audience get to know you a little bit better too. And like you, obviously, a newly minted dad of 2, so I can.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, it's the best. I can partially understand the craziness over there, but it's certainly crazy times. And we'll dive into some more on your background, but very impressive. And we generally hear, folks who get into sales, or at least are this far along in their careers, a lot of them, didn't know that that's what they wanted to get into, and didn't know that that was the track they're going to take. So
yeah,
I'm pumped to jump in with you. If you're ready, let's dive into the 5 questions.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm ready.
Awesome. So question number 1, what is the best investment an early career salesperson can do for themselves and why?
So I want to start by saying that I think the best investment any person can do for their career in general is to actually go into sales. And so the people listening to this podcast and going through your programming, they're already on the right track, in my opinion. But I say that because I think the skills you acquire in a sales role, from managing difficult conversations to effective communication to problem solving to prioritization, they are the same skills you need for any leadership role in any industry or function. So great job already. But to answer your specific question around the investment to make once you've chosen sales as a career path, I think mine would be to sell something that you really believe in and or passionate about, and especially early on in your career. And I say that for 3 reasons. I was a consultant, so everything's kind of in 3s for me. But the first reason is you are going to hear no way more times than you are going to hear yes. And it will make you doubt yourself. It'll make you doubt the product that you're selling. It's just inevitable. And so selling something you really believe in, I think will help you get through those tough days. I think the second reason to do this is customers can see through BS. Like they know when you're being genuine or authentic about yourself or the product. And conversely, I think they know when you're passionate about the product And that enthusiasm and passion, I think, rubs off on customers. So just makes you a more effective salesperson. And I think the last thing I'll say about it, and probably the most important, is you are going to talk about this product all day, every day, for as long as you are with the company. And so you better like it, right? Because no product is perfect. There's flaws in every product. But if you like the product, those flaws, I think, will translate into kind of a roadmap for the product or ways you can improve it versus becoming just like a laundry list of roadblocks against you. So that's my advice. Sell a product you can believe in.
It's great advice, and you kind of inceptioned the question, right? So the best investment you can actually do if you want to go into sales is go into sales. I love it,
Yeah.
and I think that's right. We've heard it a few times on the podcast, not as clearly as you laid it out, but the reality of this career is you probably will never face this type of rejection in any other career path, right? Like
Yeah.
you're sitting there either on the phone or through email or LinkedIn or wherever you're doing outreach, and you are getting rejected potentially up to like 98% of the time. Like that's a lot of rejection, and it's good to learn that early in your career. It sets the tone for, hey, look, I'm gonna have to battle some things in my career, professionally or personally or in many other ways. It's not always going to come easy. And I don't mean this to diminish, the academic path, but academics are typically laid out very specifically for you,
Yeah.
right? There's a curriculum, there's grades you're supposed to get, and when you get into the professional world, like there's no path. There's
Yeah.
nobody carves this out for you. You're thrown in, and it's on you to make it work. So I totally agree for a lot of the reasons that you listed. The one that resonated the most is like, you just get rejected. You get knocked down so many times, you get back up. That's what sales is all about.
Yeah. And I'll add, I think like the only maybe job where you get rejected more is an entrepreneur or someone who's starting their own business and trying to like raise money or get employees to follow your cause. And so if that's ultimately your end state, I certainly think that sales is a great entry point for that.
Absolutely. I reflect on that quite often, how sales prepped me to be in this entrepreneurial role right now as somebody who founded a company, and frankly couldn't have had a better foundation than
Yeah, totally.
dialing and just having people say a slew of different things, some
Yeah.
very, very mean, some, nice but polite no's. But yeah, rejection is a good thing to learn early in your career.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Awesome. Question number 2. What is the biggest surprise you experience early on in your career, and how has it shaped you?
So I think the biggest surprise I experienced early on in my sales career, which as I mentioned was a little bit later than when I started my actual career, but was how much more important it is to listen well than to talk well. And I think from the outside, before I got into sales, I always thought the best salespeople were the extroverts, right? The ones who could walk into a room, command the room, tell incredible stories, and were just naturally articulate and engaging. And the people that honestly like intimidated me personally, since I am not the most articulate person, and I'm certainly not a naturally strong like, public speaker. And don't get me wrong, I think those are amazing skills for anyone to have in sales. But what I learned over time is you can't win on those tactics alone. It's just not enough. And the best salespeople I've encountered are the ones who are phenomenal listeners and are just naturally curious, right? The ones who ask amazing questions, who are present and like actively listen to those answers, and then who use that approach of like asking and then listening to get to the root cause of their customers' biggest problems and then problem solve around them using their product as a solution. And that's what I found to be successful for myself as well as for my teams.
I'm glad you took it in that direction for a few reasons. The first of which is, sales people in general have kind of been, let's call it stereotyped, and what you see on TV or the movies as this smooth talking Glenn Glenn Ross, Wolf of Wall Street, generally like white male, right? Who's just
Yeah.
slamming down doors and cashing checks or cashing checks, breaking necks, whatever you want to call it. And that you get into reality. That's just not how it is. I think you're spot on there. One, salespeople come in many different shapes and sizes. And two, active listeners or active listening as a skill is something that the absolute best salespeople have. I remember one of the earliest folks that I ever managed was a fellow who was a pure introvert. You know, he sat down every day, made his 60 calls, but when you listen to the call recordings, it was like, you know, a savant with listening, a savant, and
Totally.
like he could teach a course in active listening, right? It was 25% of the time he was talking, 75% of the time he just got the prospect to spew their pure emotion, and it was amazing to listen to. I have an offshoot on this. How do you learn, a better way to phrase it, how do you learn how to actively listen? Or is there a skill that you can kind of create if you don't necessarily have that to start in your career as sales?
That's a great question. And maybe I'll share like one of the tips and tricks like I've utilized to be a better listener. And it's actually like a mental shift in how I approach customer conversations. And so rather than thinking about them as like pitches or demos, I try to think about them as like interviews and working sessions. And it's a small nuance, but it like really works for me because it forces me to ask myself ahead of a call, like, what do I need to know or learn about this person? Or what hypotheses do I need to test in order to understand how this product can actually help and benefit them? And in general, that leads to less talking, more asking, and more listening. And then when you are talking, like ensuring you're really addressing what the customer is saying versus like honestly just like checking off a few boxes on the talk track. And so I don't know if that's a helpful tip for others, but I think that just like reframe of like, it is an interview, it is a conversation, it is a working session, it is not a pitch or demo, I think changes the dynamic on how much you think you should talk versus how much you think you should listen.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. The first time we've heard that too, and I think this is a good both strategy and tactic that people can use right away and very actionable. So thanks for sharing that. Question number three. What is one mistake you made early on in your career uh, that shaped the way that you operate today?
So, one mistake I made early on in my sales career, and I'm like incredibly embarrassed to admit this because it has become my biggest pet peeve as a sales leader and sales manager, is that my first few weeks of selling, and as I mentioned, I was new to sales, had no formal sales training, but I did like whatever it took to close the sale, even if it meant setting unrealistic expectations upstream that hurt the relationship downstream. And I think I just naively thought you had to tell customers what they wanted to hear, or like more particularly, honestly, like what you thought they wanted to hear to win the deal. And for me, when I was at ClassPass starting out, it was stuff I thought was like pretty harmless at the time. So things like touting revenue estimates that were just like a bit out of reach, or painting like a rosier picture of some product features than were true, or even like telling them onboarding was going to take 30 minutes, but really I knew it was going to take 2 to 3 hours, right? And it optimized for like the short term. Like I got the yes, I got the sale, but it put the long term relationship at risk, led to like much unhappier customers, really painful conversations with their account manager, and then ultimately just like lower revenue for the business because those customers were much more likely to churn and be unhappy. And the upsell process was going to be much, much longer. Um, and so fortunately, I pivoted my strategy rather quickly. I unfortunately had to do a number of those like account management calls. And as I mentioned, they were incredibly painful. But I think what I learned is you will be like much more successful, or I was much more successful being honest about the benefits and value props of a product, as well as the limitations of that product, and managing expectations effectively. Because ultimately, what you're doing in that is like you are building trust. And what so many customers are looking for is not just a product that fits their needs, but a person and a company that they trust and that they believe like align with their values, and sets the foundation up for a future where you can upsell more easily and you have higher retention and you have better relationships with customers. And so I think that's like a cycle some people can get into where they're just like trying to get the sale and they're not thinking about the long-term implications of what they're saying kind of up funnel.
Yeah, I frankly, I really appreciate you going in depth on there. And I think what I learned from your answer is you did the right thing after knowing or understanding, kind of, I mean, whether they like to admit it, I think most people have probably oversold something or gone, above and beyond to make sure that they get the yes in sales. But I think what you did after the fact was really interesting, which was sit in on some of these or all of these account management calls and see the downstream effects of it. Not everybody gets that view into how, let's call it, to put a blanket term on it, right? An oversell will actually impact the long-term relationship for company and customer. So I think you jumping in, understanding like that downstream effect, and then jumping back and editing the sales process is really helpful. And I think that's something folks can learn from is, hey, look, it's great to get the sell. You're to get the sale. You're going to hit your goal quicker. You're probably going to get a little more commission, but downstream, results in less sales in the long term. So I think you laid it out really clearly there.
One thing I'll also mention now that I oversee kind of both sides, the pre activation and post activation sales team, I have even more empathy for this problem. And I think as a sales manager and going into leadership positions, I've been much more intentional about putting in things into the account executives like quota or commission plans that actually like incentivize that right behavior, right? Like spiffs on retention or the amount of money that client is able to generate in the first 30 days or first quarter, um, so that they feel empowered and encouraged to set the right expectations upstream.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I often encourage, especially in training programs, to folks sit alongside account managers or customer success folks
Yeah,
to
they're
see
great.
like, hey, look, you know, once you complete the sale, it's not just like, hands off, I'm done. It's, hey, the company now has to make this customer super, super happy. And
Yeah,
that's a full team that gets that job done, not just customer success account management. It's the salesperson, it's marketing, making sure the targeting is correct. So
yeah.
I really like that. I think that's smart. Awesome. Question number 4. And some folks take this a different way. You can talk about a situation, you can talk about people, but who has had the greatest impact on your career and why?
Yeah. So I thought about this one a lot. And I think there's actually two people. So can I cheat and say two people?
100%. Go
Okay.
for it.
Okay, cool. So the first is a woman named Mary Biggins, who was my manager, as well as the co-founder of ClassPass. And the second is my husband. And for two very, very different reasons have they helped my career. Um, but first I'll talk about Mary. Mary, to this day, is the most talented salesperson I have encountered in my career. And she has two qualities that I admire and like aim to emulate in any sales I do. The first is that she's what I'll call like pleasantly persistent. She's a hustler to the max, but in a very endearing way to her prospects and customers. And then the second is what I referred to earlier, like she's a great listener and problem solver, which is what I view great sales reps to be. And I'll tell like a quick story here to showcase this for Mary because I think it's just very funny. But when I was at ClassPass, she operated under this belief that no one will refuse a meeting with you if you are literally like outside their door with a smile. And so she would just book trips to different cities across the country where we had our biggest studio partners. So think like studios that have national franchises all over the US with no meeting booked. And she would just show up at their offices with like cookies or fruit baskets. Or she would just email them that she was in town and tell them she would reach out every single day until they were willing to meet with her, even for 5 minutes. And inevitably they'd cave because they think it's like somewhat charming and take the meeting. But then in the meeting, she treated it like just a working session. Like she would share the ClassPass vision, but then she just listened, she asked questions, she problem solved with them live and came up with a few ideas for them to noodle on based on their specific needs. And it nearly like always worked. I would say 9 times out of 10, she got the brand on board. And it was just like honestly incredible to watch and learn from. And I've adopted her strategies ever since. I don't think I'm as good as Mary, but I'm in constant pursuit of being as good as Mary. So that's Mary. For my husband, I mention him because I think everyone needs a cheerleader, whether that's your manager, your parent, your partner. Sales is like really, really hard. And I think mentally too, like really challenging. And you are going to have some difficult days where you just doubt yourself and you need someone to help you get through them. Like someone to remind you of like all the good deals you've done when you're only focused on like that one big deal that you've lost. And that's been my husband to me. He's listened to me talk about work and customer stories like every day for the past 10 years. And he's like taken on that role of advocate and cheerleader. And I'm so, so grateful for that.
Yeah, I appreciate you laying out kind of the yin and yang there, right? So you have the Mary, who obviously has done it before, and I don't think I've ever heard it put that way, but the pleasant persistence, like that's so cool, and I might have to steal the cookie baking and showing up
Yeah,
at
totally.
someone's door. That's awesome. And then your husband, who obviously cheers along, and you're right. You probably need both. You need to see somebody who's done it before and done it at such a high level, or even somebody who's just a few steps in front of you and can do it, much better than you can at the time.
Yeah.
And then somebody who's just, either whether, yeah, again, manager, parent, spouse, somebody who's just there to cheer you on and really encourage you, especially in the face of all this rejection. So I appreciate that you laid both of those folks out, and it seems like you've had some really great influences in your life.
Yeah. And I think it's so important for individuals, particularly early on in their career, to find those mentors, both formal and informal, and people that they look up to, um, that they want to emulate and be,
Yep.
and try to develop those relationships with them, try to get advice, get them to coach you on your hard sale. And Mary certainly was that for me, and I think really shaped who I became as a salesperson.
Yeah, it's clear why ClassPass took off the way it did. I mean, explosive growth from that company, and I've heard stories through the grapevine. But to hear that more specifically laid out and see, hey, this is exactly what the CEO embodied too. It's really
Yeah.
cool. Not all CEOs can get up and hustle their way into sales like that. Some have an affinity towards product, and there's no right or wrong answer there. But it's really inspiring, and I can imagine being on the team and just being inspired every day when you hear stories like that.
Yeah, 100%. It's like lead by example. So
Really cool. Really cool. Last question for you. If you could go back in time, now that you have the benefit of hindsight, what advice would you give yourself as you were entering in your career, and why?
So I think you talked a bit about this on a prior podcast, but I think it's important enough to reemphasize. So I'm going to go with it, um, which is that I think if I had the benefit of hindsight, I would try to go back in time and remind myself that interviews are two-way streets, that, of course, the interviewer is interviewing you and trying to understand if it's a good fit, but you are also interviewing them and should be trying to assess if the company and the manager, specifically the manager, is a good fit for you. And I recognize that starting out in your career, this might feel like a luxury. Like you are literally just trying to get a job, or at least that's how I felt when I was first out of school. Like I was not focused on diligencing my employer. I was just hoping someone, like anyone, would hire me. But I think it took me like a little too late into my career to realize things like culture and values and your manager, like they matter so much and are likely going to be the most important things in determining your personal happiness and career growth. um, and maybe the last thing I'll say on this, which I tell my teams this all the time, but I like to remind people that you spend more time at work and with the people at work than you do with your friends, your family, like, or your kids if you have any. And so you should enjoy it. And I encourage folks who are interviewing to just reflect on what's important to them and then really try to seek that out in an employer.
Well, I'm a big fan of that answer,
Yeah.
and certainly something that we preach in the ramp course as well is and something I did not know. Neither did my co-founders. None of us really knew this going into it. We were born out of the mentality, or entered into our career with the mentality of like, take the best job you can get. It doesn't matter who it is. Work your butt off, and then see what comes of it. And that mentality was instilled, maybe in a previous generation. I'm not exactly sure where it came from, but I think now, especially at this juncture, it's more important than ever to understand, I think, with the advances in communication around mental health, to understand that like it's okay to interview with the expectation that it is a two-way street, with the expectation that you are also running your process on the employer, future employer. Because if you wind up in a spot that with a poor manager or somebody who's going to negatively influence your career trajectory, that can have a really significant impact on your mentality and where you go from that first role, and vice versa, right? If you wind up in a spot with an exceptional manager, exceptional team, tons of tools, tons of things that you can learn, and obviously financial upside as well, like you can be set for the rest of your career. It could really launch you into the stratosphere. So take the time. I think that's lost on a lot of folks entering their career. Really, really take the time, and it's okay to pass on opportunities and wait, extra 4, 6, 8, 12 weeks to find the right role. It's really going to be okay. Just find that perfect fit for both you and for the employer.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more.
Awesome. Well, Jen, it's been great having you. Where can folks find you?
I think probably the best place to find me is on LinkedIn, Jennifer Burke. And if you're really eager, you can email me. My work email is jennifer@faire.com.
That's super nice of you to give both pieces of contact information. Folks out there listening, take Jen up, but if you email her, make sure that you're being persistent in the right way. So make
pleasantly
sure
persistent. Yeah.
Pleasantly persistent. That's right. Be pleasantly persistent. Well, Jen, really appreciate you coming on How I Sell. This has been a great conversation. Our folks are going to learn a ton, both strategically, tactically, and I think you framed up a lot of mentality things as well for how to enter in and have a productive sales career. So we really appreciate having you and hope to have you back someday on the Ramp podcast.
Awesome. Thanks, Danny. It's been fun.
Thank you. Talk soon.